It was one of those rare afternoons when the rain didn't just fall, it whispered stories. The streets of New York glistened under a thin silver curtain, and in the corner of a small family-owned diner, a man who once commanded empires sat alone, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. His name was Ethan Cole, a billionaire known for building one of the most successful tech corporations in America. To the world, he was the man who had everything: fortune, fame, influence, but behind the tailored suit and confident smile, he was a son haunted by silence. His mother, Margaret Cole, had been deaf since birth, and though Ethan owed his brilliance and compassion to her, fame had drawn a curtain between them. Years of running companies, chasing deals, and attending galas had replaced the quiet dinners and handwritten notes they once shared. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of compassion, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like this remind us that humanity still shines through even the hardest walls of pride and success. That afternoon, Ethan wasn't in that small diner by chance. His luxury car had broken down a few blocks away. The irony of a billionaire stranded in the rain with no assistant to call, no driver to rescue him, was almost poetic. He stepped into the diner, shaking off the cold, and the bell above the door jingled softly, like a memory trying to get his attention. It was the kind of place that smelled of pancakes, old stories, and second chances. A few customers chatted quietly, and behind the counter was a young waitress wiping down a table, her hair tied back in a messy bun, her apron a little too big for her petite frame. Her name tag read Lena. Ethan sat down in the corner booth, pulling out his phone, still frustrated about the morning's business meeting. He'd just lost an important investor, and the press had started questioning his company's moral image. His empire, which once seemed unbreakable, was beginning to show cracks. Lena approached with a warm smile that could melt even the frostiest mood. She didn't recognize him as the billionaire who graced Forbes covers. To her, he was just another customer, tired and wet from the rain. She handed him the menu gently, asking if he wanted something warm. Ethan nodded absently, his mind elsewhere, but her tone, genuine, patient, and kind, pulled him back slightly to the present moment. Minutes later, Lena returned with a steaming bowl of soup and a cup of tea. "This one's on the house," she said softly. "You look like you need something good today." Ethan gave a faint nod, his throat tightening, because kindness was something he hadn't received without reason or price tag in a long, long time. He watched her as she moved between tables, smiling, helping, laughing quietly with a group of elderly customers like she'd known them forever. There was something rare about her, something unpretentious. As the rain lightened outside, Ethan glanced at his watch. He needed to pick up his mother from her care facility soon. Since his father passed away, Margaret had been living there with full-time assistance. Her hearing loss wasn't what kept her there, it was her fading health and memory. He'd visited less and less often over the past year, ashamed of how the business had consumed him. But today, he had promised to take her out for lunch, just like the old days. When Ethan arrived at the facility an hour later, his mother was waiting near the window, her eyes bright but tired. She couldn't hear his footsteps, but when she turned and saw him, her whole face lit up. She reached for him, signing, "My boy." Ethan smiled, though guilt washed over him. His sign language had grown rusty over the years, his hands stumbled over words, and she noticed. Her eyes softened, but she said nothing. He drove her back to the same diner, thinking it might be a cozy, quiet place for her to enjoy. When they entered, Lena looked up from behind the counter, instantly recognizing him. "You're back." "Car trouble again," she teased lightly. Ethan smiled a little, shaking his head, and helped his mother to the booth. The old woman's eyes roamed the space curiously, her hands fluttering slightly as if she was tracing invisible memories in the air. Margaret couldn't hear, but she felt the room, the vibrations, the laughter, the hum of life. Ethan tried to communicate, stumbling through the words, but the frustration showed on his face. Lena noticed. She came over to take their order, but when she saw Margaret's confused expression, she hesitated, and then, without a word, her hands began to move. She started signing. At first, it was simple, "Hello. How are you?" Then it grew into full sentences, her fingers flowing gracefully like poetry in motion. Margaret's eyes widened in astonishment, and then, suddenly, tears welled up in them. Ethan froze, disbelief written all over his face. His mother's hands fluttered back in response, signing excitedly, and for the first time in years, Ethan saw her laugh, not a polite smile, but the kind of laughter that comes from pure joy. Lena smiled softly as she conversed with Margaret, asking what she'd like to eat, where she was from, how she felt today. Every gesture was precise, beautiful, and gentle. The entire diner seemed to pause and watch this silent yet vivid exchange. Ethan could barely breathe. His chest felt heavy, his throat ached, and a lump formed that no amount of swallowing could push away. He hadn't seen his mother so animated in years. When Lena stepped away to place their order, Ethan turned to his mother, who signed, "She understands me. She speaks my world." That simple sentence shattered him. All his millions, all his accolades, all the applause from boardrooms and investors meant nothing compared to this moment, a moment of true connection given freely by a stranger. He sat there in silence, tears building in his eyes, and for once, he didn't hide them. As they ate, Margaret signed stories to Lena each time she passed by. She spoke about her son's childhood, how he used to sign, "I love you," before going to bed, how he promised never to forget her language. Lena listened intently, her eyes kind, her responses warm. Ethan watched it unfold like a dream he didn't deserve. When the meal was over, Ethan quietly asked for the bill, but Lena shook her head. "Please," she mouthed gently. "It's my treat." He protested, pulling out his black card, but she simply smiled and signed, "You already paid in smiles." That was the final crack. The billionaire who had held his emotions behind walls of iron broke down. He covered his face, trembling, tears spilling freely as his mother reached over and held his hand, her expression full of maternal pride and understanding. That day, Ethan felt more human than he had in decades. He asked Lena where she'd learned sign language. She told him her younger brother had been born deaf, and she'd promised him as a child that she'd never let him feel alone in a world that couldn't hear him. But he'd passed away 5 years ago in an accident, and ever since, every time she met someone who signed, she felt as though her brother was speaking through them again. Ethan couldn't speak. The world he lived in was filled with contracts, metrics, and bottom lines, but this girl, this waitress, had reminded him that humanity wasn't measured in numbers. It was measured in moments like this, when hearts recognized each other beyond words or wealth. After that day, Ethan returned to the diner often. Sometimes with his mother, sometimes alone. He learned to sign again, practicing late at night, rediscovering the language of his childhood. He started to make changes, at his company, in his life. He created a new initiative to provide jobs and tech support for people with disabilities, especially the hearing-impaired community. And every program he funded, every campaign he launched, carried a quiet tribute, inspired by a waitress named Lena. Weeks later, Lena received a letter. Inside was a simple note in sign language symbols printed across the page, "Thank you for giving me back my mother's voice." Attached to it was a foundation certificate, her name listed as the honorary co-founder of a new project called Silent Voices. She cried quietly, overwhelmed not by money or recognition, but by the thought that her small act of kindness had rippled into something vast and life-changing. From then on, the diner became something of a legend. People would come not because of the food, but because of the story of a billionaire who broke down in tears when a waitress signed to his deaf mother. And if you're watching this and your heart feels a little heavier but also a little warmer, take a moment now, like, share, comment, and subscribe if you believe kindness still has the power to change lives. Because this story isn't just about Ethan or Lena. It's about you, me, and everyone who chooses compassion over indifference. Before we end, we'd love to know, what's the kindest thing someone ever did for you, or that you did for someone else? Comment below and share your story. Your words might just touch someone's heart the way Lena's kindness changed Ethan's. As the years passed, Ethan's company became a beacon of accessibility and empathy. His mother lived to see her son not as a billionaire, but as the boy who once signed, "I love you," and finally remembered what it meant. Lena continued working at the diner, though now, the world knew her as the woman who reminded a billionaire what real wealth looks like. One rainy afternoon years later, the same way it all began, Ethan visited the diner again. His hair had grayed slightly, but his eyes were softer now. Lena greeted him with a smile, signing, "Welcome back." He signed back, his movements confident and sure, "Thank you, for everything." In that small diner, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the smell of coffee, two souls who had once been strangers shared a silent moment that said more than any words ever could. Because sometimes, the loudest love is the one spoken in silence.